Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're embarking on, well, an extraordinary journey, reaching back through the centuries.
Way back.
Exactly. To uncover some profound wisdom from a source you might not expect. Imagine finding this hidden gem of a thinker.
Mm.
Someone whose ideas, maybe not always grabbing the loudest headlines, but they quietly, powerfully shaped entire fields of philosophy theology.
Absolutely, a quiet giant.
Yeah. We're talking about a mind so sharp, so astoundingly precise, that they earned this incredible nickname, the Subtle Doctor.
It's a great nickname, isn't it? Really captures something essential.
It really does. And this isn't just about, dusty old texts. It's about uncovering a brilliant mind whose foundational insights might resonate today. They give us new ways to think about identity, reality, freedom,
Yeah.
all the big stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's unpack this.
That's right. So our mission for this deep dive, as you said, is to really extract the most profound insights from the sources we've gathered about this remarkable figure, John Duns Scotus.
John Duns Scotus. Got it.
We'll delve into what we know about his life, his groundbreaking philosophical contributions, and try to truly understand why he earned that fascinating title, the Subtle Doctor.
Yeah, what made him so subtle?
Exactly. And what's particularly compelling about Scotus, I think, is how understanding his thought gives you this critical, often alternative perspective
Alternative to what, mainly?
to the prevailing intellectual currents of the medieval period, especially in relation to his incredibly influential contemporary, Thomas Aquinas.
Ah, Aquinas. The big name.
The biggest, arguably. But Scotus wasn't just adding footnotes to Aquinas, He was offering a truly distinct intellectual path. He wasn't just reacting, he was building something new.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We need to cast our minds back to 13th century Europe. If you were looking for a true golden age of systematic thought, this was it for scholastic philosophy.
It really was a peak.
Imagine this huge intellectual movement, almost like a Herculean effort, really. They were meticulously trying to synthesize Christian theology with the philosophical insights of ancient Greece.
Especially Aristotle.
Right, Aristotle looms large, taking these sprawling, sometimes tricky puzzle pieces of Christian faith and fitting them together with Aristotle's razor-sharp logic and metaphysical blueprints.
It was an ambitious project.
Incredibly ambitious, and the goal was grand. Defend and explain religious dogmas, but not just through, simple belief. They wanted to do it through rigorous reason, meticulous logical argument.
Reason and faith working hand in hand. That was the ideal.
And this wasn't some niche academic thing tucked away in a corner,
Right.
right? This was the dominant intellectual framework. It permeated the universities, shaped all the theological debates. It really defined how people understood the world, God themselves.
Absolutely. You can't understand the thinkers of the time without understanding scholasticism.
Yeah, it's like trying to understand an app without knowing the operating system it runs on. Crucial context.
Precisely. And within this vibrant, intellectually charged environment, Thomas Aquinas is, well, he's widely seen as the absolute pinnacle, the undisputed champion, you might say, of scholasticism.
Benchmark setter.
Exactly. His huge body of work set the standard for how you integrate Christian theology with Aristotelian thought. Immense influence, comprehensive system.
Okay.
Yet, into this established, highly structured landscape steps John Duns Scotus. And he emerges not as like a mere rebel,
Right.
but as a truly unique and complex figure. He didn't come to tear Aquinas down. He engaged deeply with Aquinas' system, supported parts of it, definitely,
Right.
but he also critically challenged and profoundly refined other parts. What's really illuminating here is that Scotus wasn't just a critic or just a follower. He was this incredibly sophisticated philosopher, forging his own distinct path, but from within that tradition.
Okay, so he knew the system inside out.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why his nickname, Dr. Subtilis, the subtle teacher or subtle doctor, is just so perfect. It captures his incredibly intricate, highly analytical approach. Every distinction, every conceptual nuance really mattered to him.
It sounds like he wasn't just critiquing from the sidelines then. He was right in the heart of it, using the same tools, speaking the same language.
Exactly. Same toolbox, different blueprints in some key areas.
But building something, distinctly new within that framework. So if we think about his core ambition, was it finding a deeper harmony between logic, metaphysics, that study of ultimate reality, and theology, those core scholastic tools?
That's a great way to put it. He was definitely aiming for harmony, but perhaps a harmony based on slightly different principles or with different notes emphasized.
You can almost picture him trying to make sense of the biggest questions imaginable, right? God's nature, what makes me me?
The fundamental questions of existence.
Yeah. And using the most rigorous methods available back then. It's this quest for ultimate understanding, but with this, like, unprecedented level of conceptual clarity and precision he seemed to demand.
Indeed. And he didn't just aim for harmony. He introduced profoundly new perspectives. These didn't just tweak things, they shifted the whole landscape of these philosophical debates.
Like what specifically?
Well, he delved with incredible precision into the relationship between essence, what something is,
It's whatness.
right? It's whatness and being, the simple fact that it exists.
Yeah.
He pushed boundaries on understanding individuality. What makes this thing uniquely this thing, distinct from everything else, even others of the same kind?
That sounds huge.
But it was. He also grappled with God's nature, not just theologically, but with intense metaphysical rigor. And crucially, he brought this compelling new emphasis and a really robust defense to the idea of human free will.
Free will. Okay, that's always a big one.
A massive one. And his take had profound impacts later on. So his philosophy, it served as this sophisticated alternative to some of Aquinas' interpretations, but it was also just a monumental milestone in enriching medieval thought, pushing it in directions others hadn't quite conceived or articulated yet. He added layers of subtlety, complexity. He expanded the whole conversation.
Now, when we talk about these intellectual giants from centuries ago, there's often this veil of mystery, isn't there? Like the day-to-day details.
Yeah, the personal lives are often quite shadowy.
Exactly. Concrete details about Scotus's life, pretty limited, actually. What we know comes mostly from indirect sources, writings of his followers, university records, biographical bits collected much later.
Right, we piece it together.
But we know some key facts. Born around 1266 in Duns, Scotland, hence Scotus, the Scot.
Makes sense.
It's almost poetic, though, how their ideas just loom so large, totally outliving the mundane biographical stuff. Leaves you wondering about the person behind the massive intellect living in the shadows of history, sort of.
It really is a testament to the power of ideas, isn't it? His intellectual journey, though, that's much clearer. It follows the path of the brightest minds of his time.
Okay, so what was that path like?
Well, he likely started his education in Scotland, basic grounding, Latin, logic. But to really flourish, like many aspiring scholars then, he had to go to the intellectual powerhouses, Oxford and Paris universities.
The big leagues.
Absolutely. Paris University especially was the undisputed intellectual capital, the very heart of Christian scholasticism then.
So that's where he really dove deep.
That's where he immersed himself. Deep study of Aristotle, and crucially, deep study of Aquinas' towering system. This wasn't casual reading. It was intensive, systematic work. It formed the bedrock for his own unique philosophical development. He absorbed the best before forging his own way.
And it wasn't just philosophy in a vacuum, right? He joined the Franciscan order.
That's right, integrating rigorous monastic discipline with his intense philosophical work.
Which is such a powerful reminder, you know? Back then, religious orders weren't just about spiritual devotion. They were often the primary incubators of intellectual life.
Huge centers of learning and scholarship.
Yeah, within their walls, scholars could dedicate themselves entirely to knowledge, supported by the order, an environment where deep thought was encouraged, even seen as a path to divine truth.
It speaks to a profound dedication, combining that academic rigor with monastic demands. A holistic pursuit of truth.
Definitely. So his academic career took off in these places.
It flourished. He taught at both Oxford and Paris, basically the Ivy League of the 13th century. Students came from all over Europe. His writings, his lectures, they quickly became central to the biggest debates. He drew a large, devoted following. People wanted to hear his subtle distinctions, his complex arguments.
Wow. So he made a big splash quickly.
Very quickly. Sadly, though, his life was relatively short. He passed away in 1308, only around 42 years old. Likely in Cologne, Germany, he'd moved there shortly before.
Only 42. That's young.
It is. But what's truly remarkable is how quickly his ideas gained traction, started to form a distinct philosophical school, despite his short life.
So his followers picked up the torch immediately.
Right away. This swift adoption laid the groundwork for a whole new intellectual tradition. His followers, especially back in Paris and Oxford, rapidly took up his concepts, developing them, systematizing them, defending them vigorously. They made sure his subtle insights spread far and wide, influencing generations. His legacy was cemented almost instantly.
Okay, let's zoom back out to that 13th century intellectual landscape for a second, because it wasn't static, right? We mentioned Aquinas' dominance,
Helmets.
his Aristotelian theology, this massive system integrating philosophy and Christian doctrine, God's existence, creation, human nature, ethics, the whole shebang.
A comprehensive framework.
He really built this towering edifice of thought. The reigning champion, setting the gold standard in the scholastic ring. Lots of challengers, but Aquinas had set the bar high. His influence was everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But despite that immense influence, you really can't overstate it. His system, powerful as it was still seen as, well, insufficient or incomplete by some very sharp philosophers.
Not necessarily hostile, though?
Not always. Often it was a genuine intellectual drive to refine, clarify, or just offer different perspectives on questions maybe Aquinas hadn't fully resolved or had approached in a way that left room for other interpretations.
Okay.
And Paris University, as we said, was this ultimate magnet. Students, scholars from everywhere, bustling intellectual marketplace. You had Aquinas' dedicated students defending his views, but also critics, all engaged in intense debate.
Sounds lively.
Oh, incredibly. Debating the very foundations of reality and faith with astonishing rigor. And at the same time, Oxford University emerged as another vital hub, often with a slightly different flavor, maybe more critical, more innovative sometimes.
And Oxford was important for Scotus's order, right? The Franciscans.
Crucially important. It was at Oxford where Franciscan thinkers were particularly active in developing alternatives to Aquinas.
Yeah.
A really fertile ground for new ideas. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, these weren't just minor squabbles.
Right.
These were fundamental debates shaping the very understanding of reality, God, humanity's relationship with the divine, intellectual fireworks forging the minds of the era.
So Scotus wasn't in some isolated tower. He was right in the thick of this rich, sometimes contentious, dynamic atmosphere.
Deeply embedded.
Educated in it, honed his skills there, developed his own system in direct dialogue with, and often in subtle opposition to, the dominant Thomistic framework. And it's important, like you said, his approach wasn't simple rejection. It was respectful but deeply critical engagement, a sophisticated dialogue between giants.
Exactly. Each striving for truth, but from different starting points with different emphasis. He took the framework, pushed its boundaries, revealed new possibilities.
Okay. And did he have particular areas where his subtlety really came to the fore?
Oh, definitely. Within this broad landscape, he carved out unique spaces. He dove deep into the metaphysics of individuality, trying to understand, not just acknowledge, what makes each existing thing uniquely itself, irreducibly distinct.
Individuality, okay.
He vigorously explored free will, providing that robust defense we mentioned, often contrasting with views leaning more towards determinism.
Right, free will again.
And he meticulously re-examined the fundamental nature of God, not just theologically, but with intense metaphysical rigor, offering arguments for God's existence and attributes that were original and profoundly influential. These specific areas and his unique approach really set him apart, marked him as an indispensable voice in an already brilliant field. He wasn't content to just reiterate, he had to redefine and refine.
All right, now we're going to really lean into what makes Scotus so unique, why the subtle doctor. We're diving into metaphysics. Exactly, that philosophical bedrock asking. What is reality at its core? What are its fundamental principles? This is where it gets really interesting with Scotus's most original, maybe even mind-bending contributions. Prepare to have your concepts challenged.
In a good way.
Hopefully.
Ah.
So let's start with this distinction between being ens and essence, essentia. This was foundational for scholastics, right? Aquinas had a clear view.
Very clear and very influential. For Aquinas, essence is what a thing is. It's whatness, like humanness for a human. It defines its nature.
Okay.
Then there's existence, simply that it is. And for Aquinas, these were really distinct. You could grasp the essence of a unicorn horn, magic, etc., without it actually existing. Essence defines, existence actualizes.
A separate step, almost.
In a way, yes. Existence is an act that brings the essence into reality.
Okay, so how did Scotus approach this?
Well, Scotus, with his characteristic subtlety, offered a powerful critique, especially regarding created beings. For him, that distinction isn't as sharp, not as radically separate. He argued that being, the actual fact of existence, is much more fundamental and intimately integrated for created things. It's not some external feature that comes along later to complete the essence.
Like an accessory you add on.
Exactly not like that. For a created thing, its very being is an indispensable, inherent part of its reality. co-primordial with its essence, you might say. It's a formal distinction, he'd argue, not a real separation in the same way Aquinas meant.
Okay, a formal distinction. What does that mean practically?
It means it's a distinction our intellect makes, based on the concepts, rather than two separable things out there in reality. It raises this important question. Does something being precede what it is, or are they more intertwined from the start for created things, like two sides of the same coin? Scotus shifts the emphasis significantly. He suggests that for anything that is, its being is deeply integrated into its nature. It changes how we understand the fabric of existence for created things. Being becomes more primary, more immediate.
It's like saying you can't really separate the dance from the dancer while they're dancing.
That's a great analogy. They are conceptually distinct, but existentially inseparable in the act.
Okay, this next concept, heichetas. You said this is maybe his most original revolutionary idea.
Arguably, yes. It's incredibly profound. It's a Latin term, literally meaning thisness property.
Thisness, like this specific thing.
Exactly. Think of it as the ultimate metaphysical principle that distinguishes one individual from all others. Makes it singular, concrete, uniquely itself.
Okay, give me an example.
Right. Human is a common essence we all share. We're all human. But what makes this specific human, you, listening, distinct from that specific human, me speaking? What makes this particular dog, Fido, different from every other dog, even his identical twin brother, Spot?
Not just things like height or hair color.
Not just those accidental traits, no. For Scotus, it's an irreducible positive individualizing factor, a thisness that makes this particular entity uniquely distinct from all others past, present, or future.
Wow. So what does this all mean for, for us, for the listener?
It's about what makes you uniquely you. Fundamentally, metaphysically, beyond just your shared humanity, it gives a profound metaphysical grounding to your individuality. Your uniqueness isn't just accidental, it's a fundamental, inherent aspect of your very being.
That feels important. It gives individuality real weight.
You've captured it perfectly. Scotus's heichetas provides the ontological basis for individuality, grounding it in the very nature of being. Before him, the common view often saw individuality arising from matter, almost an accidental addition to the more fundamental common essence.
So the humanness was more real than the meanness.
In a way, yes, for some earlier views. Or individuality was just seen negatively, not being that other person. Scotus flips that. He says thisness is an intrinsic positive principle that individuates the essence. Imagine the philosophical earthquake.
Yeah, that sounds radical for the time.
It was. He declared individuality a fundamental, irreducible part of being, a positive reality. This kicked off a whole new, robust debate in the Middle Ages about the individual's status in being. Heichetas allows beings to have both a common essence, like humanity, and their own utterly unique individual reality, simultaneously and intrinsically.
So both are equally real, the universal and the particular.
Exactly. It gave individuality a much stronger, more fundamental metaphysical weight than previously acknowledged so forcefully. It resonates today, right? We talk about personal identity, unique experiences, individual rights. It affirms that the specific you is just as real, just as fundamental as the general human you share with others.
Okay, building on these ideas, Scotus also saw reality as ordered, right? A hierarchy.
Yes, a very clear and meticulously structured hierarchy of being. Not chaotic, but ordered with different degrees of existence, perfection, dependence.
So who's at the top?
God, absolutely, at the apex, the highest and simplest being. In his absolute perfection, God contains no complexity, no plurality, no composition, no parts to God, pure unity.
And below God?
All created beings. And they are, in stark contrast, complex, multifaceted, composed of different elements like essence and existence, form and matter. They exist in varying degrees of perfection and reality, further from or closer to God's pure being.
So it's a scale, in a way.
A scale, yes. A systematic explanation for the immense differences we see in being. And a key distinction Scotus makes here is crucial. God's existence is necessary.
Meaning
God must exist by his very nature. Uncaused, eternal. Created beings, however, are merely possible or contingent.
You can exist but don't have to.
Precisely. Their existence isn't guaranteed by their essence. They depend entirely on God to bring them into being and keep them there. This distinction, necessary versus contingent being, is absolutely key to understanding his metaphysical structure of creation, the relationship between God and creatures. It marks the radical difference between uncreated self-sufficient reality and created dependent reality, a profound framework.
And building right on that hierarchy, you mentioned God's simplicity. Scotus really hammered this point home, didn't he? God as simple and indivisible.
He strongly defended it, yes, and not just as a theological belief, but demonstrating its philosophical necessity.
How so?
Well, for Scotus, when it comes to God, essence and existence aren't just intertwined, they are absolutely identical. God is his existence is his essence.
Okay.
This identity points directly to God's absolute and necessary existence. It means God cannot be fragmented, cannot have parts, cannot have a complex structure. There's no this bit and that bit of God. He's pure unity, pure simplicity, the ultimate undifferentiated reality.
So simplicity is perfection for him.
Exactly. This supports the classical idea of God's absolute unity, immutability, unchanging nature, and perfection. It's a foundational theological assertion, yes, but Scotus grounds it deeply in philosophy. If God were complex, made of parts, what would hold the parts together? Some external principle. But that would contradict God's absolute self-sufficiency.
Right, that makes sense.
His precision here is classic Scotus, emblematic of the subtle doctor, leaving no stone unturned to ensure coherence. Simplicity is the ultimate perfection, essential to the divine nature.
Okay, so we've grappled with his metaphysics, the fabric of reality. Now, how do we know any of this? Let's shift to epistemology, the theory of knowledge.
Right. How do we acquire knowledge? What are its limits? How reliable is it?
Scotus, being Scotus, must have had some deep, nuanced analyses here, too.
He absolutely did. His epistemology starts with the idea that knowledge isn't a direct, unmediated grab of the object itself.
It's not like our mind just absorbs the thing.
No. Instead, knowledge is fundamentally a mental representation of the object's reality. But, and this is crucial, the representation isn't the object itself. It's our mind's way of grasping it.
So our mind is active in this, not just passive.
Very active. Our minds don't just soak things up like a sponge. The human mind performs an active intellectual abstraction at a conceptual level. From seeing lots of individual trees, we abstract the universal concept of treeness.
Abstraction. Okay.
What's fascinating here is his clear picture of how our minds process, filter, and construct our understanding. We don't just receive raw data. This active role of the intellect, this process of abstraction and conceptualization, is key to his view of knowledge. The mind contributes significantly to what we know.
So it's a mix of what's out there and how our mind engages with it. And he wasn't about picking one path to knowledge, right? Like reason or faith.
No, definitely not either. He advocated for reason and faith working together, not in competition, but as complementary sources, each valuable in its own domain.
How did he see their roles?
Well, faith is indispensable for understanding divine and supernatural realities, things revealed by God beyond our immediate senses. Think Trinity incarnation.
Things reason alone can't reach.
Exactly. But he firmly believed reason, within its own limits, could provide certain knowledge of the natural world, and even establish some fundamental truths about God, like his existence, his unity.
So very much in the scholastic tradition of synthesis.
Perfectly aligned with that core goal, yes. Seeking harmony between revelation and human intellect. It's not about choosing. It's understanding their distinct yet complementary roles in grasping the world and what's beyond it. Each has its place and power.
And given his nickname, I bet he valued clarity in all this. Precise knowledge.
Oh, absolutely. He didn't just want knowledge, he wanted precise knowledge, free from ambiguity. He heavily emphasized precise definitions of concepts and rigorous logical consistency.
That wasn't just academic fussiness for him.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It was fundamental to getting at the truth. He insisted on the most rigorous, meticulous use of language and logic, precisely to eliminate uncertainty and ambiguity.
Why was that so critical?
Because if our concepts are fuzzy, if we use words loosely, if our arguments aren't logically sound, our conclusions will inevitably be flawed, misleading, maybe just unintelligible. He saw philosophy and theology like intellectual surgery, needing the sharpest tools, the steadiest hand.
That's a great image.
It really captures his approach. And it raises that important question for us today, doesn't it? In our world, often drowning in imprecise language, how much do we benefit from striving for that kind of precision in our own thinking and communication? His insistence on clarity feels remarkably relevant.
Okay, building on that relentless quest for certainty and precision, let's talk about proving God's existence. A huge challenge. Did Scotus have his own take, different from Aquinas' famous 5 ways?
He did indeed. Distinct and highly sophisticated arguments. While Aquinas often started from observing the created world effects leading back to a cause.
Like motion needing a first mover.
Exactly. Scotus's approach often put more emphasis on God's necessary existence and God's absolute simplicity.
Necessary existence, we touched on that. God must exist.
Yes, God's existence isn't contingent on anything else. It's inherent in God's very nature, an ontological necessity. God's being is self-sufficient, eternally actual, simply is, needing no external cause.
And simplicity ties in how?
Building on divine simplicity, Scotus argued that all divine attributes, omnipotence, omniscience, perfect goodness, aren't separate parts of God. They're unified, inseparable within God's single, indivisible essence, aspects of his singular, ultimate perfection.
So God isn't powerful and knowledgeable, he's just perfectly simple being.
In a way, yes. The attributes describe the perfection of that simple being from different angles. So connecting this to the bigger picture, Scotus wasn't just rehashing old arguments. He was reframing the foundation. How do we conceive of a divine being's necessity and internal coherence?
So less about effects in the world, more about the nature of ultimate reality itself.
Often, yes. His arguments aim to ground God's existence not just as the best explanation for the world, but as a being whose existence is a logical necessity flowing from his perfect nature, bridging reason and faith in a profoundly logical way. He's arguing God isn't just plausible, but necessary.
All right, let's turn to one of the most significant, maybe most debated aspects of Scotus. Human free will. This sounds like an area where he really made his mark.
It absolutely is, hugely influential, and for many deeply compelling. Scotus makes a very strong, unequivocal assertion. Human will is truly free,
Truly free, meaning?
meaning our will possesses genuine freedom in its choices. For any given action, we have the real capacity to choose to do it or not do it or choose something else entirely, even if all the conditions leading up to it are identical.
No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Not for Scotus. This wasn't a minor point. It was foundational to understanding human nature and our relationship with God. And crucially, he meticulously argued that this robust human freedom does not contradict God's universal knowledge and determinism.
Okay, hold on. That's the big one, right? The tension point. How can God know everything in advance, be all-powerful, yet we're still genuinely free?
That was a massive intellectual challenge. Many thinkers wrestled with it. And what's truly fascinating here is how Scotus navigates this complex, seemingly contradictory tension.
How did he do it?
He carefully constructed a framework giving robust space for genuine human freedom without undermining God's sovereignty. He argued very subtly that God's knowledge of our free future choices is not causative.
Meaning God knowing doesn't make it happen.
Exactly. God knows what we will freely choose, but his knowledge doesn't compel our choice. Our freedom remains intact. It's a very fine but crucial distinction about the nature of divine knowledge and causality.
That idea of inherent freedom is really powerful. But okay, if we do have this genuine freedom, what's the direct, inescapable consequence? It has to be moral responsibility, doesn't it?
Absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. That reconciliation of divine knowledge and human freedom was one of his most subtle achievements, really earning him that subtle doctor title. And yes, the consequence is unavoidable because Scotus firmly establishes the ontological basis of free will.
Meaning he grounds it in our very being.
Yes, makes it a fundamental part of what we are as human creatures. It follows logically and necessarily that we are morally responsible for our actions.
But because if we weren't free,
then the whole concept of moral responsibility collapses. How could you hold someone accountable for something they couldn't have chosen otherwise? It wouldn't make sense.
right.
So this concept of truly free will is critical for both ethics and theology. Ethically, it underpins virtue, vice, blame, praise. Theologically, it's central to understanding our obligations to God, sin, salvation.
So our choices genuinely matter in a cosmic sense.
Profoundly, the idea that we genuinely choose to love God or obey or choose otherwise gives real meaning to our moral lives, our spiritual journey. Our accountability, our dignity as moral agents flows directly from this foundational freedom. Our actions truly count.
That deep dive into free will really shows how interconnected all his ideas are. Let's explore his overall theological vision now. You said it's tightly woven with his metaphysics and epistemology.
Absolutely. It's all part of one coherent, grand philosophy. You can't really separate the strands cleanly.
And this idea of profound freedom, both God's and ours, seems to underpin so much of it.
It really does. His theology reaffirms God's nature as absolute simplicity and necessary being, as we've discussed, unique, uncaused existence. And our connection to God is understood through our creatureliness, we're created, dependent, but also through our unique possession of free will.
Freedom and love, you mentioned.
Yes, he emphasizes freedom and love in God's relationship with humanity, God's interactions with us, his grace, his decrees. These aren't compelled by any necessity. They are freely willed acts of love and benevolence. God's will is primary and supremely free for Scotus.
And that freedom extends to creation itself. God didn't have to create.
Absolutely, that's a cornerstone. Creation wasn't some inevitable overflow or consequence of God's nature, like some philosophies might suggest. It was a deliberate, free decision of divine will. God could have chosen not to create, or to create differently.
What does that emphasize for us then?
It deeply emphasizes both our dependence on God, we owe our existence to his free choice, and crucially, our personal responsibility to respond to that free act.
So in this divine human order,
Human beings are called to respond to God with their own free will, choosing to love, obey, relate. It's this dynamic interplay. So for Scotus, God's knowledge, his will, his actions regarding humanity make up a system that is both absolute and just.
absolute power, but also justice and freedom.
Yes, a vision where divine sovereignty and robust human agency coexist in this meticulously reasoned framework. It emphasizes the rational, loving, and supremely free nature of God's interaction with the world he freely chose to make. God's will is ultimate, but also perfectly rational and good.
Beyond the huge metaphysical and theological questions, Scotus also contributed to logic and philosophy of language. More granular stuff, but still important.
Absolutely. He was a true craftsman of thought, seemingly obsessed with conceptual clarity right down to the level of words and arguments.
So how did he see language?
For Scotus, language isn't just for chatting or crudely pointing at things. It is fundamentally the expression of thought. And because of that, it's a critical tool for sharing knowledge. He believed the logical structure of language ensures clarity and consistency in thought.
So messy language means messy thinking.
Precisely. If our language is muddled, imprecise, ambiguous, our thinking will inevitably follow. He saw a direct, powerful link between the words we use and the ideas we form.
That question you raised earlier really hits home again. How much do we lose today with imprecise language?
It feels very contemporary, doesn't it? His insistence on defining terms before debating.
So he wasn't just interested in using language, but using it correctly, rigorously, to build sound argument.
Relentlessly. He stressed precise and consistent definitions of concepts as the absolute non-negotiable basis for any sound argumentation. It really does feel like he saw intellectual rigor almost as a moral imperative.
Getting it right mattered deeply.
Hugely. His efforts aimed specifically at reducing ambiguity and uncertainty in logic, providing a more robust, stable foundation for philosophical and theological discussion. If you're debating profound truths, you must first agree on the terms, otherwise you're just talking past each other.
Like building on sand otherwise.
Exactly. His understanding of logic built on the rich scholastic tradition Aristotle, his commentators, but he brought this new level of conceptual clarity, pushing for analytical precision that set a new standard. Truth, for him, was accessed and communicated through rigorously defined terms and impeccably built arguments. His work was a blueprint for intellectual integrity.
Okay, we've mentioned Aquinas a lot as a comparison point. Let's dedicate a section to really laying out the key differences between these two scholastic giants. Thomism versus Scotism.
A crucial comparison. It highlights the intellectual richness of the period medieval thought was definitely not monolithic.
Right, shows the debates were real and substantive.
Absolutely. Both Aquinas and Scotus were deeply rooted in scholasticism, revered Aristotle, sought to reconcile faith and reason. But their fundamental differences, mainly in metaphysics and epistemology, led to these divergent schools.
Okay, break it down for us. Difference number one.
Metaphysics. Aquinas had that very sharp distinction between essence and being in created things, two really distinct components. Scotus, as we discussed, took a more flexible or formal approach, less radical separation. For him, being was more integrated with essence and created reality, a distinction of intellect more than separable reality. Being was more primary for Scotus.
Got it. Next.
Individuality. Scotus's Haecatus was absolutely central, that positive intrinsic principle making each thing unique. Individuality wasn't just negative, not being another, or accidental. Aquinas acknowledged individuality but usually emphasized the common essence more, often linking individuality to matter or accidents. Scotus elevated individuality to a fundamental metaphysical principle, a huge shift.
Okay. Essence being, individuality. What else?
Free will. Scotus offered that much stronger, more robust defense, emphasizing the sheer contingency, the uncoerced nature of the will's choice. The will's freedom was absolute, uncaused by prior conditions for Scotus. While Aquinas certainly defended free will, Scotus gave it this even more foundational, radical status. Voluntarism, the primacy of the will, is a hallmark of Scotism.
More emphasis on will over intellect, perhaps?
That's often how the distinction is drawn, yes. A tendency, at least.
And finally,
God's existence and attributes. Their arguments differed in emphasis. Aquinas' 5 ways often started from effects in the world, moving up to God as cause. Scotus, as we explored, really emphasized God's necessary existence and absolute simplicity, grounding arguments more directly in the concept of God's inherent being, perfection, internal coherence. His arguments often feel more abstract, more purely metaphysical.
fascinating. So it wasn't just minor tweaks. Thomism and Scotism really became two distinct, important schools of thought.
2 major intellectual traditions, absolutely. They interacted and debated vigorously throughout the later Middle Ages and beyond.
Like two different, powerful operating systems for understanding everything.
That's a good way to think about it. And it wasn't about one being definitively right and the other wrong. It was about diverse, rigorous approaches enriching the whole landscape of thought. This dynamic, this constant dialogue, pushed boundaries, forced thinkers to grapple with nuances. It kept things vibrant.
As we wrap up our deep dive, let's look beyond Scotus's short life to his lasting impact. His ideas didn't just vanish, they ignited a whole movement.
Far from vanishing, his philosophy gained a wide, fervent following almost immediately, especially in Paris and Oxford, where he taught. His ideas, particularly hiatus and his robust view of free will, were rigorously explored, debated, developed by generations that followed.
So Scotism became a thing.
A major thing. Scotism became one of the 2 most influential branches of scholasticism, right alongside Thomism, a dominant intellectual force shaping centuries of philosophical and theological discourse. This duality, this rivalry and dialogue between Thomists and Scotus, was crucial for the dynamic development of Western thought. It prevented stagnation, pushed for greater precision, intellectual friction generating new insights.
And his relevance wasn't just confined to the Middle Ages, right? These ideas still echo.
Absolutely. His precise distinctions, especially in debates about essence and being, are still referenced, analyzed, critiqued in modern metaphysics. Philosophers grappling with identity, uniqueness, the nature of existence, still find fertile ground and deep challenges in Scotus.
And individuality, that haesitas.
That emphasis on individuality through haesitas has had an indirect but significant influence on the philosophy of individuality and personality, even in secular contexts. It's a powerful counterpoint to philosophies that might submerge the individual into the universal or collective.
So what does this all mean for us now?
It means the profound questions Scotus wrestled with: what makes something unique? How free are we? What's the ultimate nature of existence? They continue to shape contemporary thought, even if we don't always trace them back to their medieval roots. He laid foundational stones that still support and challenge our understanding of reality and ourselves. It's not dusty history, it's a living legacy.
And so we emerge from our deep dive hopefully well-informed, maybe a little awestruck by the sheer intellectual power and enduring subtlety of John Duns Scotus.
He certainly leaves an impression.
He truly earned his place as one of the deepest, most original, and yes, most subtle philosophers of medieval scholasticism. We've seen his meticulous analyses across metaphysics, epistemology, theology, ethics, logic. They didn't just echo thought, they expanded his boundaries.
They pushed the envelope.
Yeah, offering that critical yet complementary perspective to Aquinas, enriching the landscape with new precision, profound insight. So what does this all mean for us today? The final takeaway.
Scotus's lasting impact is just undeniable, woven into the fabric of philosophy. His haesitas, that metaphysical foundation for individuality, resonates whenever we celebrate uniqueness. His robust understanding of free will still grounds our concepts of moral responsibility and human dignity.
Core ideas we still grapple with.
Absolutely. And his arguments for God's simplicity and necessary existence remain cornerstones of classical philosophical theology, inspiring rigorous inquiry into the divine. His philosophy is still a powerful reference point in modern metaphysical and ethical discussions. So the next time you celebrate what makes you you, that specific way you think, feel, experience the world, those unique quirks, know you're echoing a profound medieval concept, Scotus's haesitas. He gave us a language for the sheer wonder of individual existence.
That's a powerful thought.
And when you face a tough choice, feeling the weight of your freedom, you're standing on ground Scotus, meticulously prepared. The subtle doctor didn't just shape scholasticism. He laid foundations that continue to support, challenge, and invite us to really deep dive into the biggest questions about ourselves and the cosmos. So here's a final thought to ponder. What unique thisness, what aspect of reality or yourself will you choose to explore next in your own intellectual journey?